Affirm the resolution resolved. In the United States, right-to-work laws do more harm than good. Our sole contention is unionization. Right-to-work laws destroy unions and hurt the working class. Kelly 18 explains that right-to-work laws allow workers to opt out of joining a union and paying fees, thereby depriving the union of income and weakening their influence. Unfortunately, Kurtz 15 finds if too many members don't pay dues, the union will collapse. Statistics prove, as Ross 15 quantifies, that right-to-work reduces union coverage by 9.6%. This is extremely bad for three reasons. First is workplace fatalities. Right-to-work puts the lives of workers in jeopardy. The IBEW in 2018 explains that right-to-work laws have led to a 14.2% increase in occupational mortality through decreased unionization. That's roughly an extra 7,300 deaths. Unions give workers the freedom to speak up about hazards on the job without fear of retaliation. Right-to-work laws weaken our voice on the job, and that leads to unreported safety hazards and higher accident and death rates. Second is education. Right-to-work laws decrease unionization in education. Locke 22 finds that membership in the nation's two largest teachers' unions declined by 2.3% in 2022. The reasoning is simple. Averill 15 finds that right-to-work threatens teachers' unions. But a threat on teachers' unions is a threat on education as a whole. Barnum 19 finds, in places with weak unions, much of the state funding for schools were used to cut local property taxes. In strong union states, much of the money went into higher salaries for teachers, which in turn led to benefits for students. The bottom line is that teacher unions use their influence to call for school finance reforms to increase education spending and help students. Thus, states with right to work spend 31.3% less on education than other states. And because education is directly associated with outcomes, Cookson 22 quantifies that a 10% increase in per pupil spending is associated with 10% higher earnings and a 6 percentage point reduction in the annual incidence of adult poverty. Based on those findings, for every 10% drop in education expenditures, right to work pushes 20 million people into poverty by stripping them of a better education. Third is wages. Unions help increase wages for workers. Ramsey 21 finds that unions provide people with the power to negotiate, which in turn increases salaries for workers. Therefore, the National Bureau of Economic Research quantifies that unionization appears to raise wages by approximately 40%. Higher wages are critical for economic growth. Maverick 22 emphasizes that consumer spending is typically increasing along with wages. Higher wages put more dollars in the pockets of millions of workers, money that would then flow into the economy. That's why Anderson 14 quantifies every extra dollar going into the pockets of low-wage workers adds $1.21 to the national economy. For these reasons, Duran 22 tells you that wage gains for low-income workers are necessary for a strong economic recovery from recessions. By lowering wages, right to work leaves our economy vulnerable to economic shocks and makes it extremely difficult to recover from recessions. Goldman 19 finds that low-wage jobs hold back our economy during periods of growth and create broader economic instability that can hasten the next recession. Improving workers' bargaining power and increasing wages helps improve workers' economic security and therefore benefits the overall economy. Prolonged recession recoveries not only push millions into poverty within the U.S., but also leave our economy unable to contain these recessions within our borders. However, unions lead to robust economic growth and speedy recession recoveries, lifting millions out of poverty and preventing recessions from spreading globally. Hale 21 finds that economic interconnectedness makes countries vulnerable to economic shocks originating abroad. Unfortunately, while speedy economic recoveries in the past have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, right-to-work laws leave our economy in shambles, which is why research from the International Monetary Fund concludes that 900 million people could fall into poverty in the event of an economic shock like the Great Recession. Thus, we strongly urge an affirmative ballot.
We need to get the resolution resolved. In the United States, right-to-work laws do more harm than good. Before we begin, we have one key observation. The perspective of this debate should be from workers and employers. Thus, whichever side proves that both are better off and their world should win the round. Contention 1 is RTW is good for the economy and workers. Subpoint A is worker satisfaction and business productivity. According to MacroDays 18, workers are quantifiably more satisfied under right-to-work laws, proving that after the implementation of right-to-work laws, today indicate that both union and non-union workers are more satisfied due to increased competition among unions, resulting in better services for workers. Scrub 18 finds that union political spending drops 59% with their passion to right-to-work laws in favor of other investments, one of which could be workers. This is key because worker satisfaction is also good for business productivity. Professor Andrew Oswald and other economists from the University of Warwick 22 find that this makes employees around 12% more productive. Google alone saw a 37% increase in productivity. Meanwhile, actively unhappy workers cost the US up to $550 billion a year. Businesses with high employee satisfaction see many benefits, such as 22% higher profitability, 21% higher productivity, 48% fewer staff safety incidents, and much much more. Some would be his healthcare jobs and revenues. On healthcare, according to New One et al. 22, right to work laws are a direct cause of increased innovation in terms of both quality and quantity. They also increase firms' R&D expenses as a share of sales by 25.8% following the RTW adoption. This has to do with increased productivity. Signal et al. 20 finds that from 2014 to 2018, there have been more than 580 healthcare technology deals in the United States, each more than $10 million for a total of more than $83 billion in value. Unemployment Mix 22 reports that the 6 top-ranking states over the past decade enjoying employment gains of between 20.8% and 31.3% are all right to work. Additionally, between 2010 and 2020, right to work states outpaced other states in a job growth by 2-1 ratio, and private sector employment grew by 18%. This trend is caused by the fact that union activities limit the ability of companies to hire new workers and force them to hoist employment conditions on existing workers. This trend has been deep-seated for some time, with families and workers realizing that right-to-work states are better for places for employment. Group of 15 states that from 2002 to 2012, average domestic immigration to RTW states was 3%. The right-to-work states enjoyed a jobs growth more than 3 times that of 14 union states, 6.8% versus 1.9%. In short, people are moving to right-to-work states from other states because of employment. The impact is also clearly seen. Workers see higher average wage growth in RTW states. Redmond 18 reports that higher gross rates translate to higher personal incomes. Between 2001 and 2016, personal income growth in right-to-work states was far greater than other states, 39% versus 26%. This is because higher wages in right-to-work states come from productivity. Unions divert time away from workers contributing to the business, thus hurting the company's sale and the workers' wages. The more the company earns, the more the workers earn. Higher wages and more innovation, in effect, save lives by ending deaths of despair from poverty. Galea 11 finds that 132,000 deaths in the United States in the year 2000 were attributable to individual-level poverty, 119,000 to income inequality, and 39,000 to area-level poverty. Additionally, Crudell 20 finds that a 1% increase in unemployment leads to additional 40,000 deaths. Contention 2 is political funding. Union funding is spent on their interests rather than the interests of their clients and workers, and union political activities are skewed towards one party. AFP 18 states that between 2010 and 2017, unions handed over more than $1.35 billion in workers' dues separate from political funds that are supposed to be used for collective bargaining only to political nonprofit groups. In that 7-year span, some $401.4 million was given to the Democratic Party and aligned groups, when over 40% of union households voted Republican in 2016. This is not good political participation. This is forcing people to pay you money so that you can spend it on political campaigns that misalign with their beliefs. Indeed, Woodfall 19 finds that according to the U.S. Department of Labor, less than 25 cents of every dollar given to unions is used to represent workers through contracts, grievances, and discipline. The rest is spent on political spending, lobbying, and money to other groups. As Scrub 18 finds in subpoint A of our first contention, union political spending drops 59% after the passage of right-to-work laws in favor of other investments benefiting workers as a whole. The impact is clear. Right-to-work laws give workers their political agency back and allow them to gain more benefits. Right-to-work laws increase job satisfaction, purchasing power, and economic freedom for workers, and lead to more productive, innovative businesses for managers. Happier workers, happier managers. Right-to-work laws are a win-win. For these reasons, we strongly urge a negative ballot.
I'll start time now. Let's go on to life satisfaction. Why are workers more satisfied in your world?
They're more satisfied for a couple of reasons. The main reason that we point out is that there's increased competition between unions, which means that they're trying to compete to give better services for workers. Another one is union political spending drops, and that allows for unions to spend more on workers instead of political lobbying.
Can I have a follow-up?
Sure.
So, can you give me an example of unions competing for better practices that directly result in better practices?
I don't have an specific example, but the evidence does specifically state that unions have increased competition once right-to-work laws are passed.
Does it tell you how much it increased competition?
It doesn't show the amount of increased competition, but it does quantify how much more satisfied they are with their work.
All right, you can take a question.
Okay, so on your poverty point, so what is the methodology, like the warranting link chain or whatever, for the 6% decrease in adult poverty in your teacher contention?
Yeah, so what we tell you is that education is a prerequisite for a secure future. Education, if you are educated, there's a higher likelihood that A, you can find a job, and then B, the job itself is going to be higher quality because your skill set is in demand. When you aren't educated, your skill set isn't as valuable to employers, and that's why we see increased adult poverty. Does that make sense?
Wait, increase or decrease in adult poverty?
Well, when people aren't educated, you see an increase in poverty. That's why Right to Work pushes 20 million people into poverty by stripping them of a better education because they didn't receive that quality education. I'll take a question now. Let's go on to healthcare. Like, how specifically does Right to Work increase like healthcare deals?
So basically, what we're saying is that RTW laws cause increase innovation because they increase firms' R&D expenses by 25.8%.
Can you give me any empiric of innovation that was a direct result of Right to Work?
I can't give you an empiric on an increase in innovation, but we do have empirics on an increase in R&D expenses, and then also multiple different healthcare technology deals. I can send the corrections later. What?
Can I have a follow-up?
Sure.
Why do R&D increased R&D expenses translate to more innovation?
Well, because with more research and development, you get more it's kind of logical, but with more research and development, you have more innovation because you're developing more.
No, but I mean like increased expenses. You were talking about increased expenses.
That's cross anyway.
Okay.
Time starts. Now, first of all, on their first contention on economy, that's wrong. Unions actually increase economic growth as unions increase worker productivity. On Guesso 20 explains that unions lead to substantial increases in firm productivity and wages. This is because unions give workers a reason to work harder as unions allow workers to speak up about issues that they are dissatisfied with in the workplace. That allows for more investment in the workers from the company, which makes workers will actually want to come to work more or do better. They cannot give you a reason why productivity increases in their world. Think about it. Workers increase productivity if they're happier with more benefits. But even then, even if you believe in this like economic growth, Stevens and Stone explains that wages and personal income are both lower in Right to Work states, yet business owners' income is higher. There appears to be little trickle down because the money that isn't being paid to the workers, that is simply just going to executives instead. They tell you that like when you have like increased growth for like companies, you have increased growth for workers. That's wrong. They're not giving the workers anything. It's just increasing inequality. But then we're going to tell you on quality of life, you really can't quantify quality of life. You should prefer our impacts. With yes, you actually know what you're voting on. But two, we'd say that unions increase benefits, which makes people happier with their wages, retirement, and financial security. But then they say that competition helps. Competition reduces wages because of supply and demand, because if you have more people competing for the same jobs, the wages are going to decrease. But then on like healthcare, right? It doesn't really matter if healthcare gets better if no one has healthcare in the first place, but unions solve because Hosetter and Clean 19 finds that unions collectively bargain for healthcare benefits. That's why Ramsey Code 21 explains that union members are 30% more likely to have healthcare benefits than non-union workers. Additionally, these healthcare benefits are higher quality than baseline coverage. In fact, Gable 15 finds that 20 million Americans obtain health coverage through collective bargaining through unions. But then we'd also say that unions campaign for bills to be passed in government. Green 19 finds that union and lobbying influences which bills are passed with less funds. USW finds that Right to Work laws weaken unions' ability to lobby. Historically, unions played an influential role in the shaping and passage of the Affordable Care Act, which gave 35 million Americans healthcare coverage. But then on innovation, like when people innovate and invest in things, they're going to invest in automation, not R&D, because automation is becoming more significant in our daily lives. That's why Rational 22 explains that innovation has been slowing down. They can't tell you why innovation has been declining, even though RTW is being passed. But then we'd also say that Greenhouse 22 explains that the nation's best known companies, including Boeing, Southwest Airlines, Disney, and the New York Times, are unionized, and they're all highly innovative, highly competitive, and highly successful. But then we'd also say that unions generally increase innovation by increasing workers' representation. That's why our card tells you that unions increase like innovation by 23%. Judge realized in Cross when Dia asked them about what innovation that came from RTW, they cannot even provide you one single example. Don't buy their argument, but then you're going to go to employment. RTW creates lower quality jobs, which is just generally worse for like the general public because they don't have like better benefits like wages in healthcare. Since we have a worker shortage in the US, we don't need new jobs. In fact, we argue that the quality matters more than quantity in this case. But then you're going to go into the second contention on political campaigns. We'd say that unions are forced to be transparent with how they spend their money. That reduces the chance that they're actually going to be unproductive with their fees. Jan 22 explains that large unions are required to disclose the total salary allowances and any direct and indirect disbursement to all their officers and employees. But then we'd say that not all money not spent on representation is bad. Unions lobby for millions of legislative reform, but also benefits workers in the long run. That is not wasted money. Lynch 16 reports that conservative ideological elites oppose Medicaid expansion. That's why democratic control of state government performance increases the probability of Medicaid expansion by 70%. That's really important because Medicaid expansion has reached more than 35 million people. That's really important. It solves for all their healthcare impacts. We access their impact better. We also help like the general public. Unions are a group of workers who use their benefits for the benefits of the workers. If lobbying for some political party is the best for the workers, then that's what they're going to do. At the end of the day, you're always going to vote the Aff.
Time will start my first read. Judge, notice that their entire case relies on the premise that right to work uniquely hurts unions and workers. This is how they link into worker safety, healthcare, teachers, unions, and higher wages. But this is not necessarily true. There are two responses here. First, look to our case. Unions exist only to serve their workers. This is a point we can all agree on. And right to work increases competition among unions for workers, leading to higher quality services being offered. Now, with competition, there was some confusion. They said that competition decreases wages, but that's when there's a bunch of people competing to be in a business. This is the reverse. This is a bunch of businesses, well, not businesses, but in this case, unions acting as businesses competing for workers. Then we see the reverse effect. That's why higher quality services are being offered. This is the reason why workers are more satisfied in right-to-work states. They question our statistics about satisfaction, but the facts bear out. It's hard to name instances of unionization competition because these happen at like various different individual workplaces. There are too many to count. But when you find the evidence, you'll find that there's a quantifiable increase in satisfaction, and we're the only side that has a quantifiable increase in worker satisfaction. We also have the evidence that says that political spending drops by 59%, likely in favor of investments into workers. This is also why workers are more productive. They say that productivity doesn't happen, but happier workers tend to be more productive workers. Again, we're the only side with a conclusive quantifiable evidence that shows that workers are happier. Thus, we have the stronger link into productivity, and this is why the United States economy is saved. This saves $550 billion for the United States economy every single year. Critically, their warrant here is that right-to-work laws cripple unions by forcing them to provide services to those who don't pay dues, in other words, free riders. But this is an inaccurate view, as Shannon 14 finds that the NRLA, which is the highest labor board in the United States and is the only source that should be trusted on labor law in this debate, does not obligate unions to represent non-members. Under federal law, unions are allowed to bargain solely for their own dues-paying members under a members-only contract. The benefits secured under these contracts apply only to dues-paying members. What this means is that you are legally, you as a union are not legally obligated to represent people who aren't paying dues. This completely delinks their entire warrant. And second, national union decline has been going on for a long time. Right to work is not the cause and may even be inconsistent with this trend. An analysis of unionization rates by Shannon 14 finds that Oklahoma became right to work in 2001, and union membership in that state has actually increased by 10%. During the same period, the national rate had a 17% decrease. Michigan became right to work in 2013, and union membership in that state decreased by just 1.8% compared to a national decrease of 5%. So this inconsistency can actually be explained by a globalized economy. Globalization essentially has made the workforce much larger. It's much easier to ship manufacturing away to China than it was 50 years ago because transportation costs are low. This means that literally anybody on earth is now a possible employee, meaning that the power of a local union will diminish anyway. And Judge, this delinks literally everything that they talk about in their entire case, because their entire case is on the premise that right-to-work laws are hurting unions. No, it's globalization. Right-to-work simply fixes them. As for wage cuts, we've already shown you in case that there's higher wage growth. When you account for cost of living, non-right-to-work states are actually 27.6% more expensive than right-to-work states, and that means that real household incomes are higher in right-to-work states. Greer 22 finds that the average median household income after you reduce taxes and you reduce the cost of living is actually $4,300 higher in right-to-work states than non-right-to-work states. Because of this, we show you that there's actually more money in the average person's pocket. This directly links into their third contention impact, saying that 900 million people are saved from poverty because there's no recession since there's more money in American investors. This already outweighs everything else in this round. So for these reasons, we strongly urge that you vote for the neg.
Cool. Ready for cross?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Time starts now. Can I have the first question?
Sure.
So what does offshoring and globalization have to do with unions?
Globalization and offshoring has to do with unions because those explain the decline of unions.
Wait, how? Like, what's the warranting?
Okay, so the warrant here is that 50 years ago, or let's just say 70 years ago, and like then say 1950. In 1950, it was much more expensive to transport things from America to China, right? Therefore, yeah. So that means that manufacturing something in, say, Michigan for a consumer in California would probably be way easier and much less expensive than manufacturing something in India for a consumer in California. And so what this means is now that transportation costs are there, and now that transportation costs are minimized, this means that it's more attractive to manufacture things in India, which means that unions, the power of unions in Michigan would decline anyway. This is why they're declining.
Wait, you're telling me that like wait, hold up. So you're saying that unions are declining for the sole reason of offshoring, right? So
not the sole.
No
yeah, that's offshoring and globalization are synonyms, really.
Okay, cool. You can take a question then.
Okay. So in your case, you talk about how like the in your case, you talk about how legislative reform is necessary and how like all of these democratic policies are necessary. Why is it that Democrats need to first take money from the union members, then give it to the Democratic Party, then wait for them to win, and then wait for them to get through all of that legislative like maneuvering so that they can pass some minor legislation when they can just take all of the money and just spend it on benefits themselves? Why is it that they only spend 25 cents directly on the worker for every dollar that they get?
Because not every single worker is in a union, right? By overall, unions overall lobby for healthcare legislation. For example, the Affordable Care Act, that's helped 35 million Americans obtain health coverage. That's a lot more than if they just took all this money and directly gave it to their workers, right?
Okay, but that's not the point of a union. The sole purpose of a union is to support its workers.
It's to increase worker benefits. There's a lot of ways that unions increase worker benefits. One, they can advocate for their workers themselves, but two, they also lobby with like the general public and the general like government to increase legislation like the ACA.
But let's look at it from this perspective. 40% of union members are registered Republicans who voted for President Trump in 2016. And if it is if they're really forced, because that's what it is, if they're forced to pay their dues to the union, and then the union sends it to the Democratic Party, isn't that motivated speech? After all, money is speech.
One, we give you a couple responses in rebuttal already. One, we say like generally like they're forced to like unions are forced to like disclose how they spend their fees. But two, we tell you that like
wait a minute, that doesn't help. If they disclose that they're spending it on all sorts of different things, how is that helping? You still have to pay.
Okay, that's cross, but we're just saying that like generally political spending isn't bad because the unions will always do whatever benefits their workers for the most. That's cross.
Okay.
Those our case weigh their case. Is anybody not ready? Okay. Time starts on my first word. You're voting for us off of our second implication on education. We tell you that without unionization ensuring fair wages and working conditions for teachers, the power of the unions weaken. That's detrimental because teachers' unions not only advocate for teachers' salaries, but also bargain for increased education spending. Unfortunately, since education spending is a prerequisite for a secure future, right to work has pushed 20 million people into poverty because of stripping them of a quality education each generation. They give you no responses, impact, or link specific, but on unionization as a whole, they give you two general responses. First, they tell you that the NLRA doesn't obligate unions to bargain like for everybody, but I would say that you have to ask yourself why unions are bargaining for everyone in the first place. I would say that unions have to remain the monopoly, and that's why they have to collectively bargain for everyone. They pretty much have no choice, even if it isn't outlined in the rules. But then, second, they say that globalization is the cause of like the union's decline, and it's really inevitable. But realize that this takes out their entire like political contention, because if the decline of unionization is inevitable, you don't need right to work to see their impacts happen. But then on wages, they read one term. They just say that right to work increases wages, but realize that the purpose of unions reform for higher wages. So obviously, unions wouldn't be effective in the status quo if people actually like weren't seeing their wages increase with unions. But then let's go on to weighing. You're going to prioritize our impact of education for three reasons. A, the impact was like conceded by them, so you can't really like there's no clock on it. But then B, you're going to realize that education with our 20 million impact is the biggest impact in the round. But then second, we prerequisite them because education is a direct prerequisite to any of their impacts. Realize that you don't see political lobbying, you don't see any of these jobs required to see their impacts because people don't have an education. But then third, realize that their impact is generational. You see 20 million people every single generation. It's really long term. But then let's go on to their case. They make a really big mistake when they concede several turns that Katie makes on their case in rebuttal. First, on better life satisfaction, on economy, realize that the money that right to work generates only goes to higher up, so that just increases income inequality. That's really bad for the average worker. It just pulls them farther behind. But then on life satisfaction, realize that unions are actually going to increase life satisfaction because the purpose of unions is to advocate for better benefits of workers through 3 reasons Katie gives you in rebuttal. A is because unions increase wages, B because they give you better retirement plans, and B, financial security. There's going to be no abrupt layoffs. People are a lot more secure. But then on healthcare, realize that they drop the turn where we tell you that unions specifically lobby for healthcare. That's a big part of them. That's why we see 30 million people getting affordable care with the Affordable Care Act that unions passed. Realize that they don't tell you how many people have been affected with healthcare. We give you 35 million people. Make my opponents provide one innovation example that's actually been a product of right to work. They give you none, but we give you that unions actually have helped with the Affordable Care Act. We have more empirics. But then lastly, on political campaigns, realize that we tell you that unions lobbying is good for members because A, indirect benefits are how real change is made. Lobbying to the government, not all of the union's representational activities can be direct. But then B, look at the Affordable Care Act. Union lobbying helped 35 million people. We give you empirics. We're winning our case. We're winning Wayne. We have offense on their case. It's too late to respond to it. At the end of the day, it's a clean act ballot.
I'll first be going down their case, the points that they brought up in summary, and I'll be moving on to my case and the points they brought up in summary for that. And finally, I'll be doing some time begins on my first read. First, beginning on education, they talk about how teachers' unions are hurt, and they say we don't provide any response here. But one, we provide the response about NRLA, but they respond to this later. I'll get to that later. But first, on their poverty impact, they say that 20 million people are in poverty because of teachers' unions being hurt. But how come we haven't seen these impacts? RTW has been around for 80 years. We haven't seen any of these impacts. This is a fact debate. We have to be looking at the impacts that have happened and the impacts that we see. There haven't been any impacts of 20 million lives because of poverty. They don't have any access to their impacts here. Moving on to our free riders point, we tell you that unions don't have to actually advocate for on dues paying members. And to this, they say that unions bargain for everyone to remain on a monopoly and stay strong. But this makes no sense whatsoever because it completely contradicts their link. They first say that free riders are why unions are being hurt by advocating for free riders. But at the same time, they say by advocating for free riders, they stay strong and gain a monopoly. It makes no sense. They're contradicting their points, but you're going to default to our point because we show you how RTW does not hurt unions. Onto globalization, they say that we explained that globalization is actually the reason why unions decline, is why we see this decline in unions. And basically the globalization, the workforce has expanded. To this, they say that it refutes our political spending point. One, this means that they just basically conceded our point on globalization. And two, this isn't the link to our political spending. We don't want to cause every single union to weaken. We just want political spending to go down. And when you see the empirics after RTW is passed, our political spending drops by 59%. Moving on to our point about unions and wages, we tell you that they completely drop our point about cost of living. And when you account for cost of living, you see that RTW has actually higher real wages for workers, meaning that they have $4,300 more dollars to spend. And basically because of this, they have more disposable income, which also solves for the healthcare point. But realize that this actually links, we can actually turn their point on recession that they completely dropped in summary, but you can actually turn their point on recession, as we said in rebuttal, but that actually, since we have higher wages, we actually solve for their point on wages, and you can turn their impact of 900 million lives being put into poverty because of recessions. And plus, and if you even don't, and moving on to their point, on their point about the trickle down point, they say that isn't the link, that isn't our link. We're basically saying because of worker satisfaction, there's more productivity. And onto innovation, they say we don't provide any examples of innovation, but we do see R&D expenses going up, and that's the point we're trying to make. And because of this, we have more innovation. Moving on to weighing, on our side, we have 900 million lives saved from recessions as they completely dropped it in summary. So we went on this point and we show you how they don't have any access to the 20 million lives in poverty impact. And on our side, we have 900 million lives. We also have deaths of despair saved because of higher wages and poverty. And we all show you how they don't have access to any of their impacts on their side. So for these reasons, we strongly urge a negative ballot.
I'll start time now. Okay, so how exactly do you link into recession?
How exactly do we link it into recession? Okay, so there's a couple of points here. First of all, we had this point where we said that happiness is increased. This is a point that goes unconceded because we say that we're the only side with quantifiable increases in worker satisfaction. That means that happier workers generally tend to be more productive workers. This has various benefits. This saves the US economy $550 billion a year, but this allows a company to get more money. And that means that there's an increase in wages for the workers. You try to say that there's a trickle-down response here, but that's simply not borne out in the facts. You find that workers see a higher wage growth, and when you account for the cost of living and other factors, they have $4,300 more disposable income. From there, we get to the point where you say when there's more money in the hands of low income or like middle class workers, that decreases market disruptions, that decreases like all of those problems. And that's in your third contention, actually, all the way back in case. And so essentially we're the side that actually solves for that because they have more money. Therefore, we're actually saving the 900 million people that are internationally affected by the effects of US recession and global recession.
Okay, I mean, two problems with that. A, you don't get to access your quality of life link. You literally drop the turn that we make in I extend in summary, where we tell you that unions increase quality of life through wages, retirement plans, and financial security. It's too late to respond to that anyway. But then B.
Well, okay, B, here's the thing. It's too late to respond to our entire link chain because that goes very cleanly conceded throughout the entire.
Okay, Katie makes that turn in rebuttal. I make that turn in summary, but let me finish talking. So, but then second, on like wages, like think about it really intuitively, right? Like the purpose of unions is to bargain for higher wages and better benefits. You don't give me any examples of any benefits generated by right to work, but we give you like the fact that unions, for example, like look at healthcare, right? Like, can you name me one healthcare benefit that has been a product of right to work?
Okay, so I want to explain this point here. We're not saying this goes conceded. You give some like half-baked response, but we're not saying that unions are hurt. We still get benefits of unions in an RTW world. And two, we do give multiple benefits like higher wages, more employment, and different kinds of benefits like that. So I don't see what your point is.
How do you get union benefits if the union doesn't have members?
What? When did we say that?
We never.
RTW reduces the number of members in a union through free riding. How do you guys get?
We show you that free RTW isn't the problem. It's just that either unions don't know their rights, and also globalization.
Globalization is not the sole factor for why unions are decreasing.
Oh, this is a point that goes. Wait, hold up. This is a point that goes completely turned.
No, Dia responds to it in her summary.
I respond to that in summary.
She tells you that
your response to it.
Wait, let her finish because it's getting a bit cluttered.
Okay, if you're seeing globalization like decrease like overall unions, RTW is decreasing this union power even more. Globalization is not.
This isn't your response. This was not.
RTW is.
No, this is what I said in summary. You can't call my.
You didn't say that in summary. In summary, you said that globalization.
It's cross, guys. It's cross. It's cross.
Cross.
Is anyone not ready? Okay. Time starts now. At the end of the day, you have to sign your ballot on the cleanest argument in this round, education. We tell you that RTW harms teachers' unions. That's really important because teachers' unions increase education for everybody and prevents 20 million people from being pushed into poverty. They do not give you a single response on our impact. This is basically clean conceded, and then they give you like a new response in second summary, which probably isn't allowed, but anyway, we'll respond to it. We say they say like we haven't seen the impacts. You do. You've seen 31%, like a 31% decline in unionization. That has directly solved for like poverty people going to poverty through education. But then on like the whole globalization thing, Dia already reads the responses in a summary. We tell you that even if globalization is reducing unionization overall, RTW is reducing it even more by 9%. We read that in case it's not new. But then you're gonna go on to like wait, right? We went on magnitude. We save 20 million people from going to poverty. Their case doesn't even have a terminal impact. Don't let them weigh on the 900 million in that we read in case. They don't access it because they literally conceded the quality of life term that I read in rebuttal. That means they can't access the 900 million. But two, we would prerequisite that anyway, because if you don't have education, you don't have a job. If you don't have a job, you don't get any of their impacts. But then we'd say that poverty is really important because it's generational. That means that it's like long-term instead of like a short-term amount of lives. But then on their case, they make a really big mistake when they concede the turn that we tell you that unions lobby for healthcare. That's really important. It takes out their second implication on the first contention when they talk about healthcare. That means RTW is actually bad for healthcare. Unions are good for healthcare. But then that also takes out life satisfaction because healthcare is a lot more beneficial. If you have healthcare, you're happier. You get more you're more productive. And overall, that's why we see better economic growth in unionized states. And that also takes out their entire political funding as well, because we tell you that political funding is good because they lobby for things like healthcare. Check your flow. They don't respond to any of this. It's a really clean Aff ballot.
There's an off-time roadmap. I'm going to be going down on the points of clash, and I'll be telling you why it's a clean neg ballot. All right, I'm starting now. Judge, first, the main key voter here is whoever wins the link on free riders and globalization. First, on free riders. Again, they completely drop the part where, in summary, where they talk about how even though there's the NRLA, sure, unions have to bargain for everything to maintain their monopoly. My partner responded to this by saying it makes absolutely no sense. First, they say that that right to work laws weaken their prospects. Then they say that it's necessary to protect these unions. At the end of the day, it makes no sense. Second, on globalization, they now bring up the new response in Grand Crossfire, where they're saying that right to work is another factor. Judges, check your flow. I guarantee you will not find a single mention of where she says that right to work is also another factor in her summary. Even then, globalization is the main cause, and globalization is the main possibility of this. What this means is that we cleanly went on this link, and what this means is it delinks their 20 million impact from teachers' unions, and it also delinks a lot of their healthcare impacts because, again, these harms stem from globalization. Next, on our wages contention, they give you a couple of responses. First, they say that a quality of life turn is conceded. A, I don't think that's true. I think it was a new response. B, even if you give them their quality of life turn, even if you give them that, you'll and they say that there's higher wages, you'll realize that that still doesn't even account for the cost of living point that we bring up. And so, and they're going to give you all of these cards about how there's greater productivity, but Judge, know that we have the cleaner link with happiness. We have the cleaner link, and at the end of the day, the facts bear this out. There's more money at the end of the day, more disposable income in workers' pockets. This directly leads to greater recession, and that is to less recession, and that saves 900 million people from poverty. Judge, we already outweigh on scope and magnitude because this gives us the clear win in just in terms of numbers, and also in terms of time frame. We show you that this is happening now. Deaths of despair is also a factor from poverty. So for these reasons, it's a clear neg ballot. Good round, guys.
Good round.
Thank you for judging.